Hello class. For this metrics exercise, you will not only draw the concepts from chapter 9, but you will also incorporate concepts from chapters 10 and chapter 11. And why is that? Well, in chapter 10 about pricing strategies, you will learn that one of the approaches to set pricing objectives is that of sales or market share, right? What is market share? This is the percentage of a market accounted for by a firm, product lines, or brand. So it's the proportion of your brand, your product, the offerings that you produce and sell, the proportion of those products sold in the whole market in comparison to the rest of competitors, right? What percentage of shoes, for example, are sold of Nike in comparison to all the other brands of tennis shoes, right? Now, this market share can be defined in two types of metrics. As you can see on the screen, these two ways of calculating market share can be either sales units or revenue. The first one takes into account the number of items or units sold, right? How many pairs of shoes, how many cars, how many cases of beer, etc. The second takes into account not the units, but the revenue, the price that consumers pay for your products. So you have to read about how to calculate market share. And this metrics exercise also builds on chapter 11 in terms of distribution channels. Remember that not all producers or manufacturers of a product sell directly to the end final consumers, as we see here on this first type of channel on top of this illustration. But many producers, they will sell their products through intermediaries, through wholesalers or retailers or some combination like that. So for this metrics exercise, you will be facing a case scenario in which a marketer is trying to assess the performance of one of its brands by looking at market share using intermediary channels and final consumers data. So here what we are going to look at is data that has been recorded on the on past performance, and your task is to analyze and evaluate what is the way that your brand performs in comparison to competitors. So you will have to calculate market share in both approaches that we talked before: units or volume of items sold, and sales or revenue, dollars, market share, not only for your brand, but also for the other competitor's brand. So this is the description that you will find in this metrics exercise. Is telling you the context of this company and why it is important to look at different market share metric calculations for decision making in business. So when you click to this icon here, this small table, you will find something like this. Remember that these are just examples of data, but in your own exercise, this will be different. The numbers, the values will be different. So for instance, what we see here is the data for our brand. Here, as we see on the left hand side, this first row is our brand, And then you have three competitors, brand A, B, and C, that you are going to compare with. And then what we have in this part here in the middle, this is the data of intermediaries, what you and your competitors sell to intermediaries, wholesalers or retailers. And then on the right hand side, these two columns at the right hand side, this is end consumer data. This is the data about sales that are made by the intermediaries to the final consumers. So here we have two participants, or two levels of channel participation: intermediaries and the final consumer. So what we see here, for instance, for our brand, we have information about the average unit price, for how much we sell our products on average to these intermediaries, and how many units they purchase from us. In turn, this intermediary sells our product to the final consumers at an average price, in this case, unit price 36.55 per unit, and they sell 13,600 units, right? And in the same way, you have similar data for competitor A, for competitor B, and competitor C, how much they sell to intermediaries, and those intermediaries, how much they sell of their brands, right? So this information will allow you to calculate market shares, right? So if you go to the last slide of these instructions file that you have available in Blackboard, you will see some notes for helping you in case you don't remember how to obtain these metrics. These are the formulas of how to obtain market share by units, right? Which is units sold per brand divided by units sold in total. Market share by sales. Well, for that you divide sales per brand divided by total sales. How do you get the sales per brand? Well, this is the average unit price of the brand times the units sold per brand. Total sales. Intermediary overstocking. What is overstocking? Well, this happens when you have, for example, an intermediary who has, let's say, a high market share of a given brand, let's say 40%, but then they sell to their final consumer 20%, right? So that's half of the market share. So if you are selling to the intermediary 40% of your brand, that's the market share, and that intermediary in turn only sells 20% market share of your brand, well, it means that they are overstocking. If they carry more inventory than what they sell, that's overstocking. The opposite would be understocking, where you sell them certain amount of merchandise and they sell more percentage-wise to the final consumer. So that's not good either. So you want to try to have a balance. What you sell, the percentage or proportion you sell to the intermediaries, is more or less approximately what they should be selling to the final consumers. That's to be efficient. This other concept here is sensitivity to calculations. How do you get that? Well, you calculate the difference in market shares. Which market share? Well, market share by units and market share by sales. If you have a lot of difference in doing these computations, let's say a market share for your brand to the intermediary is 40% when you estimate it by units. But when you estimate the market share by sales or revenue, that is 15%. Well, that's a big difference. So it means that there is a high sensitivity in the calculations depending on whether it's based on units or based on revenue. So ideally speaking, it shouldn't be very different. The calculation of market share by units or by sales should not be a very broad difference. But of course, in certain industries, that's inevitable. So the question you will be responding to have to do with identifying those differences and calculating market share. You will have to do again a number of computations. I recommend you to use a spreadsheet, Excel file spreadsheet, because you will have to do this calculation for each brand, not only yours but the others, and in both market share approaches, by sales and by unit. So when you go to Blackboard, you will find the icon for the metrics exercise, and this will take you to the My Marketing Lab, portal, which is what we see here on the screen, right? So you have here the description of the case, you have the data. So make sure to read chapters 10 and 11, because that's pretty much what you will need to use in order and understand in order to complete this exercise. Okay.